So Shadow of the Eagle, Medellin, 1809. From Alia, Spanish Wargame Magazine, issue number 16 from the early 90s. I lost a couple of videos to technical issues, so I will just do a bit of a catch-up video, I guess, but not so much what's happened. More what where I'm sitting with the game at this point. I like it. Yeah, I came into it with, virtually nothing to compare it to. Very, very little to compare it to. No extensive Napoleonic wargame background, so I guess the best way is I just didn't have much to compare it to. But now, game-wise, I do know what I'm looking for. So this game has incremental strength point loss. Looks the same as the Labatai series that I've seen. It has orders. Changing orders is fairly not involved, but there are real limits to the ability to change orders. I like that. Fire and melee done distinctly. I have to mention that because I was looking at a Napoleonic battle game, a very, very recent Napoleonic battle game out there. I'd never heard of it, but it's in the modern vein. I'll just put it that way, in the modern style. And oh, by the way, the game that I compared it to, which I haven't played yet, is Wise Bayonets. I thought of Wise Bayonets because I have that game, but I don't have this game that I was looking at online. And but it struck me again how I mean, there are a lot of Napoleonic games out there, I guess, that, yeah, this is going to be blindingly obvious for much more experienced wargamers, but you have Napoleonic battle games out there that roll all combat together into a single type of mechanic. Maybe bombarding, i.e. artillery, is separate. So I guess at one level you have all combat rolled into one, and then at another level you have combat and bombardment, and then at another level, I say the Labatai level, you have distinct fire, melee, and bombarding. I guess maybe to go down any lower, you're probably looking at miniatures rules, maybe. I'm just guessing about that. I took a look online as far as, I like this game, and I'm amazed, frankly, that I'm still playing it. I'm using some information counters from Labatai to help me charge counters, but there are some, I guess, unresolved questions. Yeah, there are definitely a few unresolved questions. I quickly looked around the internet to see if there wasn't any active discussion areas, and didn't find any. As a matter of fact, I guess others have tried to find answers to rules questions and not had much success. So I like the game enough to continue on and kind of make my own mind up about how to play it, which I don't always do. So I'm going to pick up again. Where we are now is the Spanish Spanish offensive fire. Wait, or is it Spanish shock? It's no, it's Spanish shock. Spanish shock combat. So Spanish shock combat, and this is what I'm going to zoom in here and talk about. This is where I pause to review whether I would even continue, and it has to do with maybe an ambiguity, maybe a gap in the rules. So this is where I was at. So I'm coming down the line here, resolving Spanish shock combat. If possible, like this unit here, if possible, the French cavalry is still just giving ground. Which, by the way, I'm starting to wonder whether it was. So this is one ambiguity, I guess. I've been treating it. You can advance after combat as a result of shock combat, but if there's retreat before combat, is that considered a result of shock combat or not? I don't know. Are these guys supposed to be able to advance after combat? I don't think so, because it's advance after combat. A lot of this comes down to wording, but I'm going to go again with the strictest interpretation. That no, it's not a result of shock combat that the French cavalry, as the English translation puts it, refused shock combat. They refused shock combat, which I'm not considering that an outcome of shock combat, and so there's no advance after combat. Okay. Then I get down here, right here. So I think I was going to have these two Spanish infantry melee this French cavalry right here. So I right away went to pull back to refuse shock combat or retreat before combat. And then it's like, oh, this is the first time I noticed this. So he pulls back, and he pulled back into an enemy zone of control. As a matter of fact, actually, Zocs are in front and flank X side. So actually, not only did he move into an enemy Zoc, he moved from an enemy Zoc, because he's in this enemy Zoc to begin with, and he moved from that enemy's flank Zoc to that enemy's front Zoc. So I was stumped on how to handle this. The rules don't help here at all. It's all an after taking a short break, it all came down to me for me to an interpretation. So under the movement rules, there are movement rules concerning enemy Zocs, but I don't think this is movement. Then you have retreat. Then you have retreat rules under the combat. Yes, you do. Yeah, you have retreats. Yeah, you have enemy Zocs with respect to retreats. And even though they don't call it retreat before combat, they call it refusing shock combat. I'm just going with the idea of the way I could continue on is to say, well, treat this as retreat through an enemy Zoc, and it loses a strength point. So units in a stack may retreat into different exits. If a unit retreats into an enemy Zoc, it loses one strength point, and the units are disorganized. So, and the other thing I realized is that, okay, so if he can pull back and retreat before combat, then does that mean he's now an eligible target for this unit? Anyways, if I treat it as retreat through an enemy's OC, then that tells me he's not going to move, and I'm okay with all of that. Yes, there's retreat before combat or refusing shot combat for cavalry being attacked by infantry, but clearly it would just not want to do that under these circumstances because the circumstances aren't right for that. So he would choose not to, and so now I will execute the shot combat here. So these two shot combat the French cavalry there. Both of the Spanish infantry are D morale. The French cavalry is C morale. So this was 4-1. This is 4-1, which I thought was pretty darn, good, strong for the Spanish. But actually, they roll a 2, which is actually both take a loss. So both take a loss. So interestingly, when I was looking through the shock combat modifiers, there's nothing for flank or even rear. There is +2 for fire in the flank. But interestingly, not in shock. Now maybe that's justified with the 250 meter hex. That you don't get to the point where shock combat against a flank is in 30-minute turns. You don't get to the point where plowing into the flank of a unit in shock combat. What I mean by that is, well, basically with 30 minutes and 250 meter hexes, maybe it's justified because when this unit comes into the flank of the French target there, there's time and space and opportunity for the units to simply reorient such that it doesn't become significant enough to be a DRM. But that's all speculation. So obviously the French cavalry takes a point loss. Now, when I was thinking of, I believe the owner can choose which of more than one unit takes the loss, if there's more than one option. That also reminds me of, I'm not sure what to do when the morales are different. It helped me here that both of the attackers' morale is a D, but what if you have a D and an E, or a C and a D, or a B and a D? I'm not sure I figured out exactly what to do in those cases, so I'll continue on and see if there's anything else interesting comes up in the Spanish shock combat. Now, interestingly, these two, this one and the one right off the camera there, with the D results earlier during French defensive fire, they of course will not be able to shock combat because of that result. I had the result here. This Spanish E grade infantry here, shock combat against the shock attacked. The French infantry defender, D morale there. By the way, just remember, because I'm starting to get the modifiers memorized, it's -1 for having one lower grade in morale, but it's +1 because the attacker, the Spanish, have an attack order. Which, by the way, I want to point out, attackers in shock combat who have a defend order actually have a -1. I find that interesting. But anyways, they rolled really bad. And so the attacker had to retreat 2 and check morale. So he went 1, 2, and he checked morale. He rolled really well, rolled a 6, easily passed his morale. But that reminded me of, in this game, unusually, when they talk about advance after combat, basically as a result of combat, if a hex is vacated, it can be occupied, but this is for the attacker and the defender option. So they could advance. They're not going to, of course, because they don't have a reason to, but in this case, they could actually advance. So this is one of those games where even the defender can advance if the attacker retreats. Now again, I think that's a function of ground, but even more time scale. So the last Spanish shock combat on the far left of the Spanish line is the Spanish E grade infantry there. Shock combat, the French horse artillery there, unlimbered. And I know they defend at 1/3 the strength in shock combat, which made 6-1, which is the highest 5-1 column for resolution. The Spanish rolled well too, rolled a 5, which is a defender 2, D2 result. Then I've looked and looked and looked, and I can't find anything to say that unlimbered. Did I say limbered earlier? I can't find anything that says unlimbered artillery in shock combat forced to retreat is anything. So I went ahead and retreat. So I'm going to go ahead, retreat twice, and do a morale check. They passed their morale check easily with a 4. Their C grade artillery. Well, I guess they would certainly not retreat and still be unlimbered. Again, I don't know what to do with where's my well, I'll look for a limbered marker, and I guess they are marked